Hey guys, so tonight we're talking about the impacts of the Industrial Revolution. This is the second video really of our unit, the third night you're watching the video since we split last night's video into two parts. But you can see the S wall beside you. You can pause the video and read through it if you want, but let's go ahead and get started. We have quite a bit to talk about. So, impacts of the Industrial Revolution. Population increases. So, the Agricultural Revolution increased the population in Europe and in England specifically because there was more food. It's easier to produce food, more efficient ways of producing food, and more efficient agricultural methods. Like we talked about the Cyrus McCormick's Reaper from right down the road from us. There were improvements in seeding fields, so there was less waste, and they grew better. There was the crop rotation we talked about. All of those things made more agricultural products available to people. That meant more food. With Industrial Revolution, people are moving into cities and they're getting jobs and they have more money to buy this food, and so they're healthier. They have more food. Their children are healthier. Their children are living longer. So there's a population increase. Increased standards of living for many, but not all. So like we said, people are moving to cities. They have jobs. They are making money. They can buy more products and more food. They have better living conditions. They have these job opportunities. All of these things increase people's standard of living. But not everyone is benefiting from this. The poorest of the working class had poor working conditions, long hours. Their living conditions weren't great. They were typically large families in one room, apartments crammed in the city, if not more than one family. So while the standard of living overall is increasing, it's mainly for the middle class at first. The working class, the lower class, their standard of living, it took a lot longer for their standard of living to increase with the rest of us, but eventually it does as well. Improved transportation. So with these new inventions, specifically the steam engine, there's improved transportation. Also think about back to those macadam roads we talked about, those all-weather roads where they use the crushed stone. That is also improving transportation. So they have new types of roads that are allowing them to transport goods and people throughout all weather conditions. The railroad is being constructed all across Europe and in the United States during the Industrial Revolution because of the invention. The better steam engine that we talked about in last night's video allowed them to have locomotives or railroad cars essentially to move products across the country cheap and fast. You have steamboats being invented in the United States, which allowed better movement or transportation of goods along rivers. So you have all sorts of improvements in transportation, specifically, guys, with the trains. The trains did a lot of really important big things. So one, it was a cheap method of transportation for transporting manufactured finished goods. So once these goods were made in the factories, they could ship them really quickly and easily across the country or to ports so that they could be loaded on boats and exported to other countries. So cheap, quick transportation of goods with these trains. Second, it created jobs. It took a lot of people to build the railroads. Think they did they laid the railroads by hand. So a lot of labor there. Then you had people who were running and operating the railroads, all sorts of things. So it created a lot of jobs in and of itself. It boosted, especially in England, it boosted the agricultural sector and fishing sector because now people could grow crops and ship them quickly and easily. Think if you were growing, let's use something familiar to us. So if you were growing apples, apples have a relatively long shelf life, but say you're growing apples in, let's say, in Virginia, and you wanted to ship them to California. Well, prior to trains or these modes of transportation, you could put them on a boat, but the boat would have to sail all the way around to the coast of California, which would take a really long time, or you would have to send them across land on like a wagon or something like that, and it would take a really, really, really long time. Your goods would probably go bad before them, so you couldn't access as many markets. You couldn't access as many markets to sell your goods. Now with trains, you can ship things across the country really, really quickly and easily. So it improves agriculture. And last, it's cheap and easy transportation of people. So people can ride on trains and they can live in the country, and they can ride a train into the city and work their week in the city and ride their train back out to the country. That was something that happened. Or people who lived in cities and had extra income could take the train out to the country for the weekend and visit like resorts and things out in the country. So an easy way to move people as well. Urbanization, guys. The countries, like our country, America, and all industrialized countries in the world would not look the way they did today without the Industrial Revolution. We wouldn't have these big, thriving cities without industrialization. Urbanization is the process of people moving from the country to the city, the development of large cities. That's urbanization. Environmental pollution. So while all these good things were happening in advancements in society, the environment kind of took a hit during the Industrial Revolution. So you have these factories. Factories produce waste and pollution, and at this point in time, there's no regulation on that waste or that pollution, and so they could dump waste anywhere they wanted. There was no regulation on how much pollution they could create, so the environment kind of took a hit. So yeah, not great for the environment. Increased education. So you have more opportunities for education. You have a middle class emerging that has more money. They have a belief that it is important for everyone to have at least a basic education, and so you have more educational opportunities being offered during the Industrial Revolution. Increased focus on education. Dissatisfaction of working class with working conditions. So just like we talked about with the standard of living, conditions for the working class weren't great, especially at the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. They had long working hours. You all have seen this in your DBQ packets. They had long working hours. They had really kind of hard and tedious jobs. They worked 6 days a week. The factories they worked in were often dirty and dark. They were dangerous, so it was really easy for women and children who were working in these factories around big open machines to get caught up in machines or things like that and get injured, so it was dangerous. So working conditions for the working class was not great. Their living conditions at home weren't great. Typically very crowded and dirty living conditions. So the working class wasn't exactly thrilled with the conditions during the Industrial Revolution. All right, and then growth of the middle class. So this is super important. So in the Industrial Revolution, you have these, you have businesses developing, you have factories emerging, and this increases the middle class. Before you had the wealthy, the aristocracy, the nobles or whatever, the wealthy people in society, and you had the poor, and there was a very large gap. Well, during the Industrial Revolution, there are different and new types of jobs, factory owners, businessmen, foremen who ran like the floor of the factories and things like that, merchants, more merchants because there's more goods to sell, and they're not quite, the nobles are not quite that wealthy, but they're wealthier than the average person, and so it's a building of the middle class. These are skilled workers. The middle class is made up of skilled workers, so people who had skills, but they were not just working on a factory. They had something specific. Like today, a skilled worker would be an artisan or like a cabinet maker or a mechanic or a plumber or an electrician. They are in a trade, but they have a very specific skill set that not everyone can do. So businessmen, skilled workers, professionals, wealthy farmers, these people were creating a middle class. All right, so let's go to the nature of work in the factory. You all have been looking at this a lot with your DBQ on women. So family-based cottage industries were displaced by the factory system. What this means is that prior to the Industrial Revolution, we've kind of talked about this concept before. Prior to the Industrial Revolution, things were made by hand in the home. This is replaced by factory systems where goods are now made in a factory, mass-produced, and goods are made more they're made quicker, they're made more efficiently, and therefore they're cheaper, but it changes the structure of the family kind of forever. You no longer have this nuclear family where that's, the mom is at home and makes things for the family and takes care of the children and the dad's out working. Well, now women and children are all in the workplace, and so the factory system really changes the face of the family and these family-based industries forever. Harsh working conditions. We've talked about this endlessly. It was dirty and it was dark and there was a lot of noise. It was really loud. They worked super long hours. They worked a lot of days a week. They weren't paid great. So, really poor working conditions for these people. Child labor. Obviously, you see the picture below. Sorry, guys, I have my thing is up for you. Okay, so child labor kept the cost of productions low and profits high for factory owners because they could pay children so much less than a man or even a woman. So they could have these children who were pretty good at working on machines, especially they could move in and out of the machines relatively easy. They didn't have to pay them a lot. They were doing the same work because it was just operating machine, and so the factory owners were profiting a lot from these child laborers. And owners exercise considerable control over the lives of their laborers. So you see in these cities that owners are even able to control where their workers live. So they control their wages, they control their working hours, they control where they live. They have a lot of influence over all aspects of their workers' lives. So that is what it was like to work in the factories. So social effects. Women and children are entering the workplace. So women and children are a cheap labor source for these factory owners. They don't have to pay them as much as men. And so more and more women and children are going into the workplace to earn a living for their families and make extra money for their families. Again, you all are looking at this in your DBQ. Reforms to end child labor. Because you have children working in factories and the working conditions are so bad in these factories and factory owners are really taking advantage of children, you start to develop reform movements to end child labor. You especially see this with the creation of labor unions, which we'll talk about in just a second. Expansion of education. So not everything is a negative effect of the Industrial Revolution on society. The Industrial Revolution did help to expand opportunities for education within society. Again, this is largely in part due because of the growing middle class. More people had money, so education became more of a priority. And women's increased demand for suffrage. Remember, suffrage means the right to vote. So you see women, now they're entering the workplace. They're doing the jobs that men do. They are participating in economics and in society in a new role. And they say, if we can work in the workplace just like men and we can earn a living just like men, we should have the right to vote. We should have a say in our government and politics because that influences economics. And all of this has a direct effect on us. So we should have the right to vote. So that's some of these pictures that you see around this slide in the PowerPoint. So those are your social effects. Lastly, in this video, we're going to talk about the rise of labor unions. So what is a labor union? A labor union, in essence, is just a voluntary labor association. So workers from a specific trade get together. They voluntarily join this association, kind of like a club, and they have like their heads of labor unions. They have people who are kind of the representative of a labor union, and that person is like the voice, the representative for everyone from that trade. So if you joined a labor union for electricians today, and you would have people who represented what you would all meet together. You would have you're all electricians, right? And you all have common wants and needs. You want to see common things done. And you would have representatives who would present those needs or those wants or those demands for the whole union. So the labor union kind of represented everyone in their trade. This specifically begins with skilled workers because skilled workers had more bargaining chips. So labor unions emerged for workers because they want better pay, they want better hours, they are wanting things that they're not getting from these factory owners or these entrepreneurs. And so they're making demands to improve their conditions. And so that's why they emerge. And you see this first in skilled laborers because they have more bargaining room. It is easy for any factory owner to go out into the streets and find children or women who don't have jobs and who need jobs to run a machine. If they're just watching a machine run and making sure everything's going smoothly or pulling a lever or doing a job anyone can do, you can replace them pretty easily. But if you need electrical work done, you can't just go grab someone off the street and say, hey, come wire my house. So skilled laborers is where labor unions really begin because they have more bargaining room. They need those factory owners, business people, entrepreneurs need that skilled labor, and only a specific group of people can fulfill that need. So that it begins there. And you see in England especially that labor unions, when they are created, the government is anti-labor union because they think that it's going to cause social instability and unrest. Prior to the Industrial Revolution, we saw in Europe that there's a lot of revolutions going on. There's a lot of political and social unrest. And England, in particular, wanted to avoid that. They wanted to keep political stability, social stability. They wanted to keep their economy growing. If people are forming unions and going on strike and trying to shake up the way that economics work, you're going to have some unrest. And so, especially in England, you see kind of a resistance to labor union formation by the government. But eventually they form anyway, and eventually the government kind of works with them to pass reforms that these labor unions are demanding. So let's move into like the 1, 2, 3 on our note sheet. So that was just kind of a background on labor unions. If you use the 1, 2, 3 space to fill in those notes, then take these somewhere else on your page. You need all this information. So, worker organized strikes. Labor unions encourage worker organized strikes. This is how they would make demands and get things done. So they would make demands for increased wages or improved working conditions. If they didn't get those things they wanted from the factory owners, they would go on strikes. That's what you see here is people picketing. So they wouldn't work until the factory owners would compromise with them or listen to them and give in to what they want, or at least move closer to what the union wanted. So they encourage worker organized strikes. They lobbied for laws to improve the lives of workers. So obviously labor unions are all about getting what's best for those workers, for the people who are in that skill or that trade. So they're going to lobby for laws. Lobbying is when you go to a legislative body or representatives of a legislative body and you try to convince them to support your side. So they're lobbying for laws that improve the lives of their workers. This included women and children. So from labor unions, this is where you see those reforms for working conditions specifically for children coming from. So because of the work of labor unions, you see children's hours being decreased and the working conditions for children are improving. And lastly, they wanted workers' rights and collective bargaining between labor and management. What this means is that unions were supposed to be the representative body, or the people who were representing the workers to their management, to those factory owners, those business people. And they wanted to work together. These people needed their jobs. They wanted their jobs, but they wanted to be treated fairly. And so they wanted bargaining and cooperation between the workers and the people who were running the businesses. And so that is what the function of the labor union was supposed to be.